Hi, welcome to my first Photoshop tutorial. In this one I'm going to be looking at when you create a new document. So we'll just go up to File and New, and then I'll start looking at things you need to consider when creating a new document. So you can see from my recent list here that I've got a whole bunch of things that I've been doing. But if we go through and look at the basic setups that Photoshop does offer and the optional fields down the side here. So first we've got a whole bunch of different photo sets that are designed to handle standard photography. Then a whole bunch of things for print media. In Australia we're looking at A4 for most things that fit onto a single page. In America it would be letter from memory, with legal being slightly taller. Then art and illustration, basic generic setup, so things for posters and postcards, which will also become useful. Web stuff, which you can see again, common setouts for web pages, for banners and that sort of thing. And then mobile devices as well, giving you the amount of information needed for that. And then finally film stock. So looking at generally, when you select on one of these presets, what will change is the thing down the side. So if I go to print, so first off I selected Ultra, TV, 4K. I'm given a number of pixels for width and height. The 4K generally relates to the pixel width. And you can see the orientation of that setup, and then the resolution in terms of pixels per inch, or if you're in print media, it would be dots per inch. Then the actual color mode itself, and I'll get back to that in a little while. But flicking back to print media, most of this is set up either in the American style inches or in millimeters. So I'm going to just work with the millimeter setting for the time being, and now I'm going to look at resolution. So you may have noticed with web, mobile and film, the resolution was down at 72 pixels per inch. And that's really there to save, for the web it's designed to save space, so the files are actually smaller, quicker to transmit, and they still contain a lot of information. But if you enlarge those to fill an A4 page, or any sort of page you want to print out, they usually get a lot of pixelization where you can see the little dots on the screen. With something like print media, you need a bit more detail. For magazines, so this is preset for magazines, you have 300 pixels per inch, and you can see the details there of pixels per inch or dots per inch. On the screen it's referred to as pixels per inch, on print media it's referred to as dots per inch, and I'll switch between the two at random. So 300 pixels per inch is really aimed at magazine quality. So you've got a good glossy magazine and it has that level of detail so the eye doesn't really notice. If you drop it down to 150 pixels per inch, you're really looking at the quality that would exist in a newspaper. And because of the era they started in, the print quality wasn't as good, and it was also sufficient to meet that need. So they didn't go for super high quality because it was more expensive, but it was enough at 150 dots per inch. It was enough to create good typefaces, good fonts on the page, and also to print basic imagery. These days, with the magazines being more common, we've pushed up to 300 to have that better level of quality, and the machinery can handle it. If you want to go back into the history of that thing, feel free. There's a lot out there to find out. Now, when we moved to more things being produced on the web, we could still produce super high quality images. However, the transmission times were such to send a signal from a web server somewhere in America to here in Australia that it would take forever for it to get here. And the joke going around at the time was it was the worldwide wait. You had to wait for pages to load. And so they tended to be very image light. So part of the solution for that problem was to drop the resolution to 72 pixels per inch. And that helped speed things up. And initially image sizes were fairly small. So that covers resolution. The next one is color mode. And if you look in color mode, and I'll do it for print media because it gives us more options, we have a basic bitmap, which I don't believe I know much about the color scale for that one, but it will give you a standard array of colors. You have grayscale, which does everything from black through to white. just in shades of grey. You have RGB colour. Now this is generally referred to as additive colour, where in the old cathode ray tube monitors you would get 3 beams of light fired at the screen to cause the phosphorus screen to glow, and those 3 beams would be added together to create the desired colour you want, and that's generally red, green and blue beams. And that is basically how the monitors are recorded these days, or computer screens. When we move on to Cmyk Color, that was actually designed for print media. So the light from the sun would come, hit the surface, and reflected back off that surface would be the colour that you see, with the other pieces removed from that colour spectrum, so it was absorbed by the piece of paper. So a black bench or a black car absorbs a lot of heat from the sun because it's absorbing all that colour information as well. A very white car seems very bright because most of that light is reflected. And when it hits the eyeball, that's what we perceive. Now for this one, Cmyk stands for cyan, which is a kind of blue colour, magenta, which is kind of red, and yellow, which, is yellow. And the K stands for key, or black, so to make it easier to print black colours. Lab colour is another set of colour that's, I think, a whole bunch of presets. So here you've got different sort of colour palettes to work with, depending on what you want to do. Most of the time, RGB, perfectly fine. Then we have the number of bits in terms of that colour mode. So the more bits, the more colour information is stored and the larger the file. So most of the time, 8-bit is perfectly fine, and that will record up to 256 combinations, I believe, or gradients of colour, from no colour whatsoever all the way up to full colour of that type. So red, green and blue channels would be recorded. Then 16-bit, you're really looking at something that I think sits around 16 million, and 32-bit, I have no idea off the top of my head, but it's a huge amount of colour, more than the eye can generally perceive. With the whole colour thing, the human limit, as far as I know, is about 24-bit. So that you can't see the difference in colour beyond that point. Although there are people, and then the cases have been found, I've seen stuff online, of where people can actually see a huge amount more due to a unique set of genetics. So that gives us a range of colours. If we go into Cmyk, again, 8 or 16-bit, depending on what you want. Bitmap is 1, which is just black or white, so that's what the bitmap covers. And lab colour thing. But generally, RGB is great for what you want to do. For most of the media that we produce, unless it's specifically for print media, I would go with RGB in most cases. And then you can set up the background or fill colour as done. There are some advanced options which are not worth worrying about, or worth looking at, I suppose. Square aspect ratio. So here we've got these different pixel squares. So normally you'd think a pixel is just a square block of colour. But if we jump over to the film side of things, what we'll discover is that the supposed square pixel is actually a ratio of 1 to 133. So it's either going to be tall or wide, depending on which way it is. I think it might be tall. But anyhow, back to print media. So I hit create. This will create a standard A4 document, which is then ready to be done. If I want to change the orientation and that sort of stuff, I can select it at the start. And that covers the basics of creating a new document in Photoshop. Thank you.